Hello, everyone. Welcome to Road to Punchestown. Really looking forward to this finale of the current jump season. Welcome, Ruby. We've finished over here in Britain, but you have still got a really important 5 days yet to come.
Yeah, busy 5 days. 12 grade ones across the 5 days, Lydia. Some really good horses on show. Starts with a bang with Marine National and Fact to File tomorrow afternoon. Constitution Hill, Statement, Golden Ace on Friday. A rematch of the Triumph Hurdle on Saturday. Some brilliant races throughout the week.
Yeah, I always think the three things about Punchestown. One, it can often set up a rematch. Two, it can bring together some interesting and different clashes. Factophile, Marine National being one of them, and some races might be a bit like we saw it perhaps with Sandown with some of the races, kind of end of term stuff. Horses that have perhaps done a lot already this season, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it can do, but I guess that's the same at the back end of any season, be it
Yeah.
National Hunt or Flat, that it comes to the end for some horses. It'll be the last chance for a lot of novices. So horses maybe that are feeling the pinch will roll the dice one more time. But look, just huge prize money, great racing, and I believe super ticket sales as well. So hopefully it'll be a super week.
5 days. What going are we starting out on? And can we just remind everybody, all the roadies, about what happens in terms of the course? Because it's most impactful for the hurdlers.
It is, but I would actually say that Punchestown is probably the biggest race course in the world. I would be willing to bet on that, the amount of ground it has and the amount of ground it uses at the Punchestown Festival. So in late March, when the rain stopped, Punchestown started the water back then. There's over a couple of 100 mil went down to Punchestown in early April. Obviously, the weather broke and then the rain came, so the moisture is all the way down the ground in Punchestown. It'll be on the slow side. There's no doubt about that. They do want to produce ground for National Hunt horses at this time of year, and they will do that. So it will be on the slow side. And obviously, over hurdles, then they will provide at least 5 yards of fresh racing ground every day. So by Saturday, you'll be 25 yards further in than where you started on Tuesday. So, look, it is a huge track. And the further in they go, obviously, the bit tighter it gets. But that's the wrong word, because still in Punchestown for 2 miles, they will only jump the last hurdle once.
Yes.
Twice, sorry, they jump it twice. It's only hurdle they jump twice. So, like, no matter, people say, oh, Punchestown, you got in, it's got tight. It's still about a mile and six in the circuit.
So it's only kind of relatively speaking Tuesday to Saturday. Saturday is more speed favouring the hurdlers compared to Tuesday.
Slightly, but it's still a huge race course.
Okay. And also the order of play has been reordered. At Cheltenham, we had the feature race at race number 5. It's changed as well at Punchestown.
Yeah, and it's race 6 and 7 some days at Punchestown. I think that's a good thing. I must say I enjoyed that at Cheltenham as the day built to the feature race, and Punchestown has followed suit. I look, maybe when I was riding, you wanted to get the bigger race out of the way earlier. You weren't thinking about it all day, but I do think as somebody who goes now and watches racing, I do think of it building to the biggest race. It adds to the occasion.
I tend to agree. Right, enough chatter. Let's get on with it, shall we? And start with day one, tomorrow, Tuesday. And the big race of the day is the William Hill Champion Chase. So let's take a look at the betting. And people seem to be pretty confident that Fact to File will be fine, drop down to 2 miles. The first time since he finished second in the Champion Bumper at Cheltenham, the first time ever over fences he'll be trying the minimum trip. He is favoured ahead of the Queen Mother Champion Chase winner, Marine National. But that is where we're going to start, Ruby, with how Marine National won the Champion Chase at Cheltenham.
Yeah, I suppose Marine National, probably in plenty of quarters, Lydia got overlooked because of John Bond in the champion chase. Look, you saw the start, John Bond stood, so too the Marine National. But away from the start, Solanus got away actually better than I thought he did. But for whatever reason on the day, he didn't have the gears to go with them. You expected Solanus to blitz like he had done in Leopardstown, but he wasn't. That was done over the first fence. By the time they got to the fifth fence, Solanus is pushed up to lead away from the stands, but he can't hold that lead because by the time he gets to the water jump, Enner Gamine has gone back by him. Now, Marine National is right beside John Bond for most of this race. And when you get to the ninth fence where John Bond made that mistake, look how good Marine National jumped it. And that's the one thing about Marine National this year. His jumping has improved with every run throughout the season. From his first run in Nace, where he was no match for Calixios, to that champion chase. Away from the third last, he is absolutely running away. He's going the best. Quilixios is outside him. He quickens off the bend to the second last and jumps it, and he has the race put to bed by the time Calixios falls at the last, and home he comes to win. It was a really good performance. John Bond comes to the next parish to be beaten 18 lengths, but look, it was a good effort for Marine National. He improved with every run this season, and he'll give Fact and File a race. There's no doubt about that.
He will. I mean, he was still relatively lightly raced as a second season chaser, so it was logical that he would still start to be improving. That was a well-run Queen Mother Champion chase, and hence John Bon was able to recover his position to some degree and finish second. This will be the first time that Marine Nationale has jumped fences going right-handed in public. Any
Yeah.
thoughts there?
No, I don't see it as an issue for him. He was a good winner of a Royal Bond over hurdles going right-handed, so I'd have no issue with him going right or left. It is just the nature of the races. He
Mhm.
started in Naas in that second season novice. Then the 2 mile chases are at Leopardstown. He could have went to the hilly way. He didn't because he went to Naas. But it's Leopardstown. Cheltenham is left-handed. Punchestown. It's just the nature. We've talked about this already this year. It's just the nature of where the races are.
Absolutely. It's good to see Captain Guinness finished third, but I don't see him as a player really, I'm afraid, at this level anymore for victory. Sonis, on the other hand, I wasn't really anticipating the old course at Cheltenham really suiting him. He hadn't run well there before. Might this be better?
Possibly. Long run to the first fence. And he won't have an Eniger mean to force him forward. But Sinicia might, if she's good enough. But or he's good enough. Sorry, but I was disappointed with Solness at Cheltenham. How like he couldn't hold the lead at the water jump for a horse that could spread eagle fields at Leopardstown. I wouldn't be as quick to blame the track. I don't think he ran any kind of race.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on to Factor File and your view, Ruby, about whether 2 mile is an issue at all.
It'll be hard to know until he tries it. I think he could excel at it. Look, as a novice, I know it was 2.5 miles in Leopardstown, but when they faced into the back straight, himself and Gaelic Warrior in that match, like he was able to take it off Gaelic Warrior before they got to the seventh fence. And Gaelic Warrior obviously went from there to win the Arkle. Now, we know subsequently Gaelic Warrior is a stayer, but at the time, Factifile, Mark Walsh couldn't keep him behind Paul Townend on that occasion. Look, in the Ryanair, I think going forward and using Factifile's stride brings out the best in him. I think he likes to gallop. He likes to get on with things. He sat mid-division in the Ryanair. There was a strong, good enough gallop in front. They weren't going crazy, but it was a decent enough pace. Ile Francais took it up away from the stands. And when they got down to the ditch, this is what Factifile does when you're letting him gallop. He attacks his jumps. He's brave. The 11th fence, he was going really well. 12th fence, he jumped himself to the lead at the third last down the hill. And then it was as easy as Mark Walsh liked it. Flew the second last. And Mark was careful on him at the last fence and he popped it to win unchallenged. Now, look, we've seen loads of horses probably win Ryanairs and tried to come back down the trip. It hasn't worked with many of them. Didn't work with Allaho. I think Vatour even could have been beaten by Undersow in this race as well. So, look, it is tricky to come back to 2 miles, but I do think the nature of the track in Punchestown, the long run to the first fence, the fact that Marine Nationale is not a front runner, he won't be dragging Factifile. I think Factifile will be able to get into a rhythm whereby he'll draw the stamina out of Marine Nationale.
I thought it was a beautifully judged ride by the clock by Mark Walsh on Factifile in the Ryanair. It ended up being a really quick time due to the efficiency, I think, with which he rode him. You know, much quicker than the admittedly slightly slowly run Jack Richards and Plate, but so much quicker. So you're envisaging that he's going to make all, essentially, or attempt to make all.
Well, I don't know. Solness will probably go, but I don't think Mark will be worried about Solness. He will be riding Factifile to the feel he's getting. Whereas if Solness was Marine Nationale and you had to chase him to keep tabs on him, it could put you on your head early, but I don't think Solness will put Factifile on his head. I know Undersow did to the Tour, and I couldn't keep following him. And I just think the other way around here, with Marine Nationale most likely sat beside or behind Factifile, it'll be easier for Mark.
Okay, let's move on to the Dooley Insurance Group Champion Novice Chase. And this features a rematch of the Brown Advisory. And the market expects Ballyburn to gain his revenge, Ruby. What happened in the Brown Advisory?
I think it was a slowly run race, Lydia. I think Ballyburn fought most of the race with Paul Townend and they never got into a rhythm. Look, Dancing City jumped out to make it, but he wasn't going that quick. Lecky Watson sat handy and wide, and as they raced down to the third fence, Ballyburn started to lock on with Paul and get quite joy. Paul was trying to settle him, so he was quite deliberate at the fifth fence, and then by the time they got to the first ditch, he made that howler of a mistake. They weren't going that strong at gallop. Ballyburn went to stand back. He ended up landing on top of it, and I don't think Ballyburn was ever going from there. Lecky Watson, on the other hand, jumped the next fence, the third last in the first circuit, and landed up like he was absolutely loving it. Ballyburn never got into a rhythm. He was quite slow at the 13th fence. And then when they got back to the third last, as this pit race starts to quicken, it was Lecky Watson that came to the fore, pinged the third last, and the race was on. Second last fence, he was really good. And by the time he gets to the last, I even think he's sort of idling. Now, Stellar Story does plug on from behind, so too does Gorgeous Tom. Ballyburn didn't even plug on, but I would be very surprised if Paul Townend tried to ride Ballyburn the same way tomorrow afternoon. I would think he will just fold over and think, well, you either stay or you don't. I'm not going to try and make it.
Yeah, be more positive. I think it seemed watching from the stands that the tactics were wrong from an early stage, and he was kind of stuck with them almost at that point, and the horse didn't seem to be enjoying those kind of tactics. The thing is, though, he has been sort of thinking he's faster than he is, hasn't he? He has been trying to go a bit too hard. So is that a risk?
He does. He can be keen, but he races with his head down and his jaw out. I think whatever speed you're going, he will be trying to do that to you. But I can understand Paul Townend's thinking before the race. Like, who was riding the fastest horse in the race? It's probably Paul Townend. So he rode the race for speed, but it just didn't work out. And I think tomorrow you'll just have to ride him like he stays and like he's the best horse and find out.
And is Lecky Watson underestimated, or should we?
Definitely. But fences have made Lecky Watson a better horse. He's starting to fulfill the potential he always had. He too was quite keen as a novice hurdler, but he has started to settle, and fences have made him a really good horse. And we even saw that, Lydia, back in Naas when he beat Slade Steele. And you looked at the second last that day in Naas, you're thinking, is Slade Steele really attacking his fences? We probably just didn't give Lecky Watson enough credit for beating Slade Steele, because you look back behind him, Lombron is back there, so too is Answer to Cave. It was a deep contest. So yeah, Lecky Watson was overlooked at Cheltenham. He'll probably be slightly overlooked again tomorrow, although his local owners will make sure he's not. But he's a very good horse who is starting to fulfil the potential that he always had.
Well, talking about Slade Steele, I'd imagine that Henry de Bromhead and co, Rob Corr and co, would have been much more happy with, on reflection, following the Cheltenham Festival when they saw Lecky Watson doing what he did. We see Slade Steele now. You can understand that it's a shot to nothing in a Grade 1 at the end of the season, whilst he's as yet a maiden over fences. Will he stay the trip, however?
Oh, I think he will. I think he'll be much more comfortable at this. Punchestown, it's 2 miles, 3 miles, or carry top weight in the novice handicap, a bit like Cheltenham is now. And I would say it was a no-brainer to go 3 miles with Slade Steele.
And what are you expecting from him?
Could run into money. That's all I'm expecting from him. I do think with Imperial Pass, Lecky Watson and Ballyburn, this is a strong race.
You mentioned Empire Pass. What did you make of his manifesto?
I thought the cheap pieces worked a treat on him in the manifesto, over 2.5. If you picked him up here going to the 6th fence, just how sweetly he's travelling. And the same with the 7th fence. He was forward with Paul Townend. He was attacking his jumps. He got back to the 4th last fence. He was absolutely cantering. Same when he turned in. He started to quicken up down the outside. Pinged the 3rd last. Was really brave at the 2nd last. Now you can then argue from the last fence home, does he really see it out? Or is he just pulling himself up in front? I think he's just pulling himself up in front, and I think the cheap pieces improved Imperial Pass a good bit, and I actually think he could be a better horse again, up to 3 miles an hour over fences.
So who are you siding with then in this context then?
I'm not siding with anything. It's the beauty of being able to watch one, Lydia. You do not have to have a bet in every race.
You don't have a strong view, essentially.
I don't have a strong view. I think Lecky Watson is improving. I think Imperial Pass was better at entry, and I don't think we saw the real Ballyburn. I think it could be a belting contest.
Is there a chance that Ballyburn just will never quite cut it over fences as a novice this season?
I don't. I think he was good at Leopardstown. I think there was no shame in the race he ran at Christmas, trying to chase Giorgino. I just think it didn't go right for him in Cheltenham, and he's a big chance to put it right tomorrow.
Okay. Right, let's move on, shall we, to the KPMG Champion Novice Hurdle and have a look at the betting for that, for which Kopek Des Bordes is odds on ahead of his stable companion Salvatore Mundi, who beat at Cheltenham, but who came good at Liverpool with a career best performance subsequently. Let's start off by having a look at the Supreme. A number of these reoppose.
They do. Work Ahead and Roma Culio booked out. Kopek Des Bordes sat just behind them, jumped the first okay, but Iransi in the JP colours and Salvatore Mundi in the yellow and black check of the Donnellys, they were both very keen early on. Kopek Des Bordes got into a lovely rhythm. Work Ahead was going a good gallop. He was being followed by Romeo Culio. He jumped okay the 3rd hurdle, did come alive a little bit because he can be a bit keen on the run to the fourth. But when they turned to face down the hill, Iranzi and Salvatore Mundi were already beaten. So too was Carbo, and it was whether Kopek Des Bordes could go and find enough to beat the ones in front of him. Obviously, William Money was tracking him. He was okay at the third last, jumped the second last well to put himself in a good position, and then he went to the last and missed. He's not a brilliant hurdler, Kopek Des Bordes, but he has some engine, and I think Punchestown will suit him. And I just think he's too good for these, and his price probably reflects that.
Yeah, I mean, the time was really good and compared really well to the Champion Hurdle, even had Stateman stood up, and we'll come back to that later on in the show. And it was faster at all stages than Champion Hurdle, especially after 3/4 of a mile. I suppose he's going right-handed over hurdles for the first time. Is there anything about his technique that makes you worry about that?
No, he has shimmied a little bit to his right at times and to his left. He can go both ways, but I think that's just because he's not brilliant to actually back off and jump, and he needs a bit of space one way or the other to get himself off the ground. So, no, the direction wouldn't necessarily bother me.
And Iranzi, he's since come out and won at Fairyhouse. Will this track suit him a bit better than perhaps
I,
Cheltenham did?
I think it will. I don't think the undulations really suited him at Cheltenham. He had a hold up or two, and I do think that the flat track suits him. So, look, he has a squeak, but the Salvatore Money that went to entry was definitely a better horse than the one that was at Cheltenham. There was no doubt about that.
Definitely. The hood came off. The ground was a shade quicker. Again, probably a bit like Cheltenham. Romeo Coolio, his main rival, probably did a bit too much, but Salvatore Mundi was comfortable.
He was comfortable, and they went a decent enough gallop. Romeo Coolio was in front of him, but Salvatore Mundi going to the first hurdle at Aintree was a much more relaxed horse, and he was right behind Romeo Coolio. He was a bit sticky at the fourth hurdle, but at the sixth hurdle then he jumped it much, much better. And by the time he got to the second last hurdle, he's the one you want to be on. He's arriving on the bridle, jumps the second last reasonably well, goes to the last spot, Paul gives him a squeeze, and he kind of paddles and puts down, but he was still very quick at what he did, and he pulled right away to win and beat Romeo Coolio by 7 lengths. So look, that was a good performance. I suppose going strictly on the book through the Supreme, that doesn't put Kopek Des Bordes too far ahead of what, quarter of a length, maybe further ahead of Romeo Coolio. I think it was 7 1/4 at Cheltenham to 7 lengths at Aintree. So look, it does give Salvatore Mundi a chance, and he was a good winner of the Moscow Flyer there. But I think there's more in the locker for Kopek Des Bordes, and I think he'd be really hard to beat.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to sort of see an angle on this race. Just to finish things off, Carbo ran better under a more patient tactics at Aintree than he had done at Cheltenham, but it doesn't seem quite good enough for this.
No, he's just probably a grade below this level, isn't he? A rating of 146 or 7 would put him at least 11 or 12 behind Kopek Des Bordes.
Okay. Right, those are the grade ones on the first day. We now move on to the Wednesday. So the main event of the second day is the Ladbrokes Punchestown Gold Cup. There is the betting, just 4 of them to go, but 4 very good horses. Let's start by considering Galopin Des Champs, Ruby, and he is something of a conundrum at Punchestown on this day because lots of people have their theories. Is it a bit end of term, i.e., he's peaked in the Gold Cup and it's a big ask, no matter how easy he may appear to win the Gold Cup in previous seasons, that it's a big ask after that? Is it that the ground tends to be a bit quicker at Punchestown? Or is it Punchestown he doesn't like very much? I've pulled together this table. It's using time form data. And so I've gone with time-based going rather than the official going. And as you can see, it's his record at Punchestown and or on good to soft ground. And I've highlighted the runs particularly at Punchestown, which do seem to suggest that his better performances have come elsewhere. But is that a case of timing in the season, do you think?
I would have thought so. I mean, obviously, his runs at Punchestown over 2.5 miles would be in the John Durkin in December or late November, which would be his first run of the season. And then his other runs at Punchestown are all at the back end. Look, he was very good here in a novice hurdle after winning the Martin Pipe. So I don't buy the Punchestown one. I think you can keep that now. But I would expect that his best performance would be at Cheltenham in March in the Gold Cup. That's where he would have been trained to have peaked. And I think it's very hard for any horse to repeat a peak performance. So I would have expected him to be a little less at Punchestown after winning Gold Cups. And you can even watch him, Lydia, in his two Punchestown Gold Cup efforts in 2023 when they raced up to the third last. He had moved up to take on Brave Man's Game. It was a rematch of the Gold Cup, and they had left Fast or Slow behind. But by the time both horses who'd pulled clear in the Gold Cup got to the last fence, it was Fast or Slow who was powering through to win the race. And look, that definitely Fast or Slow was coming there from the back of the Ultima. He hadn't had that run in the Gold Cup. And then you go to 2024, it's a bit role reversal. Fast or Slow was in front of Galopin Des Champs heading to the third last, and Galopin Des Champs could never quite get to Fast or Slow. Now, Fast or Slow had unseated in the Gold Cup, of course, whereas Galopin Des Champs had that race, and Paul Townend did say when he pulled up that he had gone to the well in the Gold Cup, and you could see that in him in April. But that said, they're finishing a heap in this race. Look what's right on Galopin Des Champs' tail, and they're not that far behind Fast or Slow. That can't happen at Punchestown. It is the end of the season. It's the last Grade 1. Sometimes form can be turned on its head.
I think that Galopin Des Champs should have bossed that race a little bit more. Whether he was capable of doing that was the only question. Made it more of a test of stamina and less of a relative test for speed. If we just go back and have another look at the table, then I agree with you. I don't think Punchestown is a thing. I think it's the timing of when he comes to Punchestown, which is the major thing, combined with maybe certain things that happened, certainly this time last year in the race. Good to soft ground again. He won his first Gold Cup on good to soft, but that was back in 2023. We're now talking about a horse that's in the middle part of 2025. It was possibly on the more drying side. I would say at the drying end of good to soft for the Gold Cup this year. Is it possible that he prefers a bit more dig, and or is just a bit it's age? It comes to us all that he was a quicker horse then.
He's definitely age, but I would expect Punchestown to be slower than Cheltenham was. Punchestown will put on more water, there's no doubt about that. So the ground will be on the slower side. And the Gold Cup, age definitely, and the winner was brilliant on the day, but I don't think the runner-up showed up.
No, well, and now this is the imponderable. What went on with Galopin Des Champs here? Because essentially, you and I had a chat about this race shortly afterwards, and also again in preparation for this program. We both thought he was never going, as in literally never really going.
No, and I think if you watch it from the start of the Gold Cup and you just watch Gentleman's Game, the grey horse beside Galopin Des Champs from the start all the way to the first fence. Now my expectation, and maybe I've underestimated Gentleman's Game or overestimated Galopin Des Champs, but I would expect Galopin Des Champs to be able to go for the first furlong and jump the first fence with Gentleman's Game, but he couldn't. Darragh O'Keefe edges ahead of Paul Townend all the way to the first fence, and then lands and gets away from the fence almost a length or 2 lengths in front of him. When they round the bend into the back straight then to the third fence, you can see how high Galopin Des Champs gets. Paul Townend's hands, there's no contact, the horse is not taking him forward, he's slack on the reins, and when they got to the seventh, the ditch, he has to reach for it, and when he lands, it was Paul Townend's body language compared to everybody else's. He was the one that seemed to be having to make an effort and squeeze. So for me, he was never going in the Gold Cup, and you kind of got lulled into a false sense of hope with him down to the third last fence. Galopin Des Champs came forward, and when he jumped that and landed in front, now everybody else's body language is starting to push, and Paul is still perched up. You're thinking, the real horse is going to come to the fore anyway. But off the bend, another way you're thinking, switches out from behind him, goes up to him going to the second last, and this race was all over. But I think here's the other thing that could be a factor on Wednesday afternoon is watch Paul Townend from the last fence to the line. He gives Galopin Des Champs one flick. He's beaten. He can't win the race. He probably didn't have as hard a race as he had 12 months ago, or maybe 24 months ago, because this race was over and he couldn't win.
Yeah, it's really hard to sort of assess from the outside, isn't it, for punters? How hard a race a horse has had, and I know it is for connections as well. I mean, I know that you don't, and I certainly don't want to take anything away from the winner.
No, the winner was brilliant.
Who put up a classy performance, and Galopin Des Champs would need to have brought his A game to beat him,
and a bit.
Yeah, but immediately afterwards, on the day, William Ellis was even talking about headgear, and that's the kind of performance I can understand why he was talking about that. He hasn't reached for the headgear here at Punchestown. Last run of the season, perhaps understandable. Wouldn't be surprised to see him in some headgear next season on the basis of that, because he couldn't live with a tepid pace.
Exactly. Look at what they did for Stateman in the Champion Hurdle, a set of cheek pieces, and it did look like Galopin was lethargic for whatever reason. Look, the belief was he was in really good form. He didn't show that in the race, but I do think that how hard a race a horse has when you get into a battle and you ask a horse for everything it has a hard race. But when you're beaten and you float up there to be second, it doesn't have as hard a race.
Okay. I suppose the flip side is he comes into this race unusually in the least good form than he has compared to the previous 2 years. So,
That's possible too.
yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at his opposition then, shall we? We've seen Banbridge briefly there, but let's have a look at Spillane Tower, shall we? And his the way he's proceeded out of novice company over this course and distance to what he's done this season. We haven't seen him that often.
No, we haven't. When we saw him here at Punchestown last year, we saw both himself and Monty Starr who run in this race. Monty Starr was quite handy in the Grade 1 3 mile novice chase that's on Tuesday afternoon. Spillane Tower stepping up in trip took his time. When they got back to the last ditch, which is fence 13, they were both still travelling well and jumping quite well. And from the third last fence away, even though Monty Starr was trying to up the ante and build it, Spillane Tower was always cantering behind him, landed upsides at the second last, went to the last together, and then Spillane Tower edge away to win. And to me, allayed any stamina doubts you might have about him. He then turned up in the epic John Durkin that we had way back when at the start of the season, but he was the one that dropped in Spillane Tower. Whereas Galopin Des Champs, Fast or Slow, Fact to File, they were all in the heat of the race. Spillane Tower sat behind them, and at the third last fence, he was the one that was sneaking onto their tails. Now, as the others got into a bit of a jostling match off the bend and all had to go to the second last, Jack Kennedy was coming down the outside with a well-timed run. Fact to File gets to the front, going to the last, and Spillane Tower comes, I thought, with a challenge to go and win the race. Now, he gets the Fact to File, he doesn't get by, and Fact to File pulls it out. No shame in losing the Factor file, but I did think he was coming to win that day. Now, I suppose the belief or the impression was that he would improve from there, and so Spillane Tower went to the King George, went to the first fence, launched at it, hadn't saw him do that before, kind of snatched at the first fence, and he ended up getting back in the race then. But that probably wasn't a bad place to be, because he only got back beside Banbridge, who's actually the winner. But when he got back to the very first fence on the second circuit, the 10th fence, he made another mistake. And then when they got into the back straight, as you're looking at the race, you're thinking, oh, they're too far back. But ultimately, Banbridge comes from where Spillane Tower is. But after home to the home turn to the third last, it's Banbridge who was going forward, and Spillane Tower wasn't. He fell out of the back of the shot at the third last fence, and he didn't factor from there on. We haven't seen him since. We know he's a good horse, but his novice chase form ties in with Monty Starr, Tactical Move, and Blood Destiny. He needs to be a better horse than that, and he needs to be the horse that ran in the John Durkin.
Yeah, he promised plenty then. You know, it's his first run outside Ireland, wasn't it, in the King George? Maybe something didn't go right in terms of the immediate preparation for it.
Who knows? You can't write any horse off on one run.
How about his lack of battle hardenedness at this level?
That could be a thing. Now, obviously, you watched Eli Tomp at the weekend, no run in the year, fresh, and he bolted in over 2 miles. But when you go up to 3 miles against hard fit campaigners like Galopin Des Champs, like Monty Starr, and even Banbridge, fitness will count. I think with a bit at speed, you can get away with it. When it gets into stamina races, you can get caught out.
I'm going to make a statement about each of the other two, and you can tell me what, if anything, you disagree with. Monty Starr hasn't had the most straightforward season. Maybe might have finished a bit closer bar for a bad mistake in the Gold Cup, but essentially this is what he is, and it's not good enough. And Banbridge, I'm baffled, beaten in the Gold Cup in a race where he should have been able to lie up quite comfortably and deal with the different pace that happened during the race, and yet he was beaten before the trip could possibly have been an issue.
That's the same Banbridge that ran worse in last year's Ryanair behind Protectorat and came back to Punchestown and beat Captain Guinness.
Do that.
So, Banbridge is an enigma. But when Banbridge has a go on day, he's a very good horse.
Undoubtedly so. 4 runners then in this race. Tactically, how does it play out?
Well, I can't see Paul hanging around. I don't think Rachel will be dawdling either. So I can see the 2 of those going forward and the other 2 following them away and see what happens.
Okay. It'll be good to see Galopin Des Champs ridden positively here, but just wonder about that Gold Cup, and more unusually for a horse that is so incredibly reliable. I'm just wondering what he's got, albeit even the second wasn't that out of kilter, I suppose, with his Irish Gold Cup or his Savills run of this season. Right, let's move on to the Channel Real Estate Group Novice Hurdles and have a look at the betting for this particular race. And I think the obvious place to start, Ruby, is with Jasmine DeVoe and his jumping. He got it together at Cheltenham in a race, the Albert Bartlett, that doesn't have a huge emphasis on jumping, certainly not in the latter stages.
No, I think for a Grade 1 novice hurdle, it is the race where the worst jumper can actually get away with it. Look in the Lawlers Hotel at Naas. This was him at the seventh hurdle, the one opposite the stands. And in Grade 1 novice company, you can't jump like that. Leopardstown, when he went to Nathaniel Lacey, he again missed the fourth last. But, excuse me, at Leopardstown, he did race too keenly with the cheek pieces. They went to Cheltenham, cheek pieces were off. Paul Townend dropped them right in at the back, down over the first hurdle. By the time they got to where the last hurdle was on the first circuit, he only had one horse behind him. And when he gets up to the third last hurdle, there's still not that many behind him, but here's where he made his only mistake, and it's far enough up from home to get away with it at Cheltenham. You've got that long run then, all the way down to the second last, that allows him to get into the race. He's out wide, he gets a good look at it, jumps it well, and it all came down to one jump in Jasmine DeVoe's life, and he got that one jump right. He pinned the last to beat the big Westerner. He's a very good horse, but when he turns in Punchestown with 5 furlongs to run, he'll have 3 hurdles to jump. He turned in Cheltenham with 7 to run. He only had 2. He's just maybe not as reliable at Punchestown.
Up against him is a horse that I really like, who's progressed with every start, and this is Honesty Policy, who won at Aintree over Shorter. He's going to love this trip, isn't he?
He will, and he's a lovely mindset. He's a horse who's improved all through the year. Francis Mangan did own him. He was sold to JP McManus. He went to Aintree, sat in midfield. You can see him at the second hurdle, how well settled he is with Mark Walsh. And even Mark rode a very patient race on him. When he got to the third last hurdle, there's a lot of horses in front of him, and then he missed the second last. He put down and put himself on the back foot, which meant he went to the last hurdle with 4 horses in front of him. But when he jumped the last hurdle, and Mark got him out from behind the couple in front, this fella only started to hit top gear in the last 100 yards, and he hit the line really strong. So he will give Jasmine DeVoe a race. He's a horse that is going on an upward trajectory all the way, and he's a very solid jumper. I do hope Jasmine stays over hurdles next year. I do think he could be a stayers hurdle horse back on that track where jumping is the same. He's probably a worse jumper than Big Bucks, but Big Bucks wasn't brilliant either in the beginning.
Yeah, had a lot of class though, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, Jasmine DeVoe is going to have to prove that. Okay, well, let's move on to day 3. You mentioned the stayers that are currently at the top of the tree. They're the ones we're going to be focusing on next.
I'm being run away with, for want of a better word, but I'm jumping great and I'm got the bit in my mouth. But everyone is following Ruby, as they should be. Why would you follow a 16-to-1 shot in blinkers who's running too keen? But Ruby's not going, and he ends up running poorly. And because of that, I end up getting 10 links.
Now it's time for the Ladbrokes Champion Stayers Hurdle. And first of all, I know that there is one particular viewer, one particular roadie, Ruby, that is looking forward to this section. James Stark, who contacted me the day before the Cheltenham Festival to berate us, essentially, for not including Bob Bollinger in our preview of the Stayers Hurdle the night before, the Monday before Cheltenham. And I said, time constraints, we had 4 days of grade 1s to discuss, and neither of us fancied him. And James said rather ominously, we shall see. So a few minutes after Bob Bollinger had duly won the Stayers Hurdle, I got in contact to say, fair play, hands up, didn't really fancy him. And then consistently since then, James has brought up Bob Bollinger, most recently last Thursday, when asking whether there would be a road to Punchestown. And he said, cheers, look forward to the bit on Bob Bollinger. I just didn't know he was such a bad winner.
Yeah, you're a bit novice, Lydia. You should have definitely have looked for something he tipped to you that ran absolutely stink, and stuck that with the Bob Bollinger tweet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anyway, well done, James. And now we're going to talk about Bob Bollinger. Let's have a look at the Stayers Hurdle betting, shall we? And of course, we're talking about this race and all future races with only the entries and not the declarations. So to some degree, we're less certain about the shape of the races. But we'll start first of all with Bob Bollinger's famous success in the Stayers Hurdle at Cheltenham, where he beat Jehupu, who's in the same Rob Corr ownership.
Yeah, and look, obviously the stairs hurdle or the Paddy Power stairs hurdle at Cheltenham did have Gowl Road to make sure there was a good gallop in this race. But Rocky's Diamond was there, and he is here as well, so he was good and handy. Chupu sat sort of third or fourth, and Bob Bollinger dropped out right at the back. Now we only have entries, so Cambro and Home by the Lee are both in here. Crambo fell at halfway and brought down Home by the Lee, so they were out of it. And then Rocky's Diamond did try to push the pace early in the back straight. He jumped to the lead at the seventh hurdle, and he was trying to press it on. Down the hill to the second last, Chupu is coming. He looks to be the one you want to be on. The wall park is just outside him, but Bob Ollinger was directly in his slipstream. And the wall park probably couldn't push Chupu far enough for Jack Kennedy. And when they crossed over the road, Chupu had to go on, and Bob Bollinger was always coming through for a bit of speed, jumped the last well and quick and nicely to win. I didn't fancy Bob Bollinger. I didn't think he'd get the trip. He probably didn't look like he did at Leopardstown when he went to the front and Home by the Lee came from behind him, but ridden with more restraint at Cheltenham. Bob Bollinger did get home. He was a very good winner, but they did raise more question marks about Chupu maybe than Bob Bollinger. I think it did.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I do think that Bob Bollinger would have been suited by a slow, quick, slow, oscillating pace, which is not atypical of a stayers hurdle. It favoured speed at the end, and that's what he's got. First of all, before we move on to Chupu, and I think you're making a really good point, will Bob Bollinger be able to reproduce that at Punchestown? Will Punchestown suit him?
The last time he came here as a Cheltenham Festival winner, he pulled up at odds on in a novice chase.
So you have your doubts.
I'm just giving that to James Stark.
Take that, James. Chupu, though, I think the point you're making, I mean, essentially, either has he been A, too defensively campaigned this season, or B, should we read into the way he's been campaigned for 2 seasons now that he's actually fragile?
Or do we look at it the same way as we're kind of looking at Galopin Des Champs? I'm wondering, is age catching up? Chupu was unlucky in a stairs hurdle, won a stairs hurdle, and was second in a stairs hurdle. He's had 3 seasons at that level. And he's taking his age just catching up with him too.
This does tend to be a division where horses stay there, don't they? I mean, if we think about the likes of Paisley Parkside, De Burley, I mean, they're making impressions at this.
They were, and so too the big bucks. The outlier is probably English Drever, but Chupu was a flat horse. English Drever was. The rest of those were jumpers that started a bit later. So when you go back with Chupu, English Drever is the outlier, who was an ex-flat horse. You just wondered eventually, does time catch up on them all?
Okay, you showed there the bringing down of Home by the Lee, and I thought that was a heavy bringing down. It was a bad experience for him. If we have a look at the Liverpool Hurdle, which was won by Hidden Valley Lake, Home by the Lee's pulled up. I wonder whether he was affected by that. What was your take on the whole race?
He could be, but Home by the Lee is a bit Jekyll and Hyde. There's no doubt about that. Like when he's on a going day, he's a very good horse. But look, Monmoral booked out to make it in entry. Home by the Lee sat fourth down the inside. Hidden Valley Lake was in about halfway. But when they got to halfway, or after going a circuit in entry, Home by the Lee had dropped to the back of the shot and was about to fall out of it. So he only went for a circuit, which would be very unlike him. Whereas Jatara got to the front end. Home by the Lee joined her at the third last. They went to the second last together, and Home by the Lee pulled away, or Hidden Valley Lake then pulled away from the last hurdle to win for Dara O'Keefe. Good performance from Hidden Valley Lake, who had been campaigned at this level but had been a little bit hit and miss, I suppose, hadn't he? A good second to Crambo at Ascot, disappointed in the Red Mill or the Galmoy, and bounced back at entry. But that's all three, Rob Corr, and it'd be interesting to see if all three take a chance.
It will be. I was just about to ask you that. They're clearly dominating this division. I mean, surely you just have a go with all three of them, wouldn't you? It's the end. It's the last race of the season.
I would. There's no doubt about it. Unless you want one to go to the French Champion Hurdle, maybe you do. That would be an option for one of them. Which one, I don't know. But look, Rob Corr have a pink cap and a black star. Did they have a third cap? Is that the reason they wouldn't run three?
They must have a third cap. But let's see what they do. I mean, owner form in that kind of way can be quite significant, can't they? I mean, someone like JP Manus is quite happy to run many in one race, but of course he'll have many more than Rob Corr. I just want to mention the Henry de Bromhead form, because a number of people have mentioned whether he's what the form of the stable is like at the moment. I was just looking at the time form data on it, thanks to Dan Barber and Tom Heslop for backing me up on this. So Henry de Bromhead essentially is performing averagely for the time of year compared with the previous 4 seasons. A sort of of run to form level of between 50 to 60%. That's well below his peak in March, which was up to 68%, but also well above his slump in January of 25%. And it got a bit better in February as well. So that's just something to bear in mind for the likes of Slade Steel that we talked about earlier, Montestar, and also for these two shorter price horses at the top of this market. An interesting runner is Jade de Grugy, or potential runner at this stage, Ruby. Second in the Mares Hurdle behind Lossiemouth, which was, again, a race that favoured speed. This time, she'll be stepping up in trip.
Yeah, look, as you said, potential runner. Does she wait till Saturday to take on Lossiemouth and maybe brighter days ahead? Or does she go in here? I'd be pushing her in here personally, but look, she booked out to make it in the Mares Hurdle. Jatara sat second beside Lossiemouth. July Flower, who's in here as well, of Henry, she sat in 3/4 the way back, and they didn't go quick. Jade de Grugy was still floating along, going to the fourth last hurdle, enjoying herself in front, and when they started to quicken down the hill, it got Jatara off the bridle a little bit. It was suiting Lossiemouth. It also, July Flower moved up looking like she had a chance going to 3 out, but off the home turn, it was July Flower who started to fade. Jatara plugged on, but Jade de Grugy never gave up. And I think if she's going to have a chance of winning a good race this year, it would be going up in trip to take on these horses rather than trying to hang around and have a go at the other two mares on Saturday. So, look, that'd be my preference, would be going here anyway.
I mean, if she is a stayer, then I'd definitely agree, because I think both Jatara and July Flower, also for Henry de Bromhead, would be suited by this trip more than a sort of steadily run 2.5 miles. So if Jade de Grugy is better than them at that, then and a stayer, well then, yeah, she could be a real player here.
Well, she looked too slow in the Mares Novice Hurdle last year behind Golden Ace. She went back and won over 2.5, and she beat Spindlebury at Fairyhouse. I would say staying by Dr. Dino is her forte.
Let's move on to the Barbestown Castle Novice Chase. There is the betting. Essentially, Ruby, this is a rematch, isn't it, of the Arkle between Majborough, who jumped so poorly, and Only by Night.
Yeah, but I think the scope for improvement is in Majborough. I don't think there's much in Only by Night, to be honest with you. The winner who got up down over the first fence, Majborough jumped it well. He got been in a bit close to the second, but all was rosy in the garden until they got to the fence past the stands, when Touch by Night jumped out to his right, Touch Me Not even, and Majborough jumped through on his inside. And then they got racing down the hill to the sixth fence, and Majborough, to me, looked like he was going as fast as he wanted, and he really attacks that sixth fence. Now, when he got to the ninth fence, he was overly brave for Mark Walsh, and when he got to the ditch, the fourth last fence, he dropped his hind end into the ditch. There's a couple of little niggly mistakes, and you're thinking, oh, is he jumping holding up, or is it going to unravel? Very good at the third last, but when the race got hot off the bend, it did unravel. He did the splits at the back of the second last fence, and even though he pulled himself back together, he landed on all fours at the back of the last and still went down by not very far. I think with all the mistakes Majborough made, he did incredibly well to finish as close as he did, and I think he'll jump better. I'm hoping he'll jump better. If he puts it together, I think he's the best horse.
Why should he jump better? What will make him jump better?
He's a novice. Experience usually makes horses jump better, and I think he has the jump and he has the ability. I think the run will have crowned him.
I thought he might be better left-handed. You? No,
didn't buy that. I do think in time, though, he will be better over a trip.
Okay. Let's move on to Brookie, who ran second in the Maghill at Aintree behind a beautifully ridden Caliph de Burley. Harry Cobden sort of slowing it down, the pace, but Brookie ran well in second.
He did, and I think Sam Twiston Davis robbed every penny he could. Dropped in fourth in this race, or one behind him. At halfway, he had dropped to last. By the time they got to the cross fence, he was sneaking onto their tails, but wasn't getting involved, and he didn't even try to get involved. He stayed in going to the third last. Again, going to the second last, he's biding his time, and he has one rattle going to the last, and I think maximised the potential Brookie had. Anthony Honeyball should always be watched at Punchestown, but I thought this horse got a sneeze over right to finish second.
Yeah, amen to that Anthony Honeyball point. Right, okay, that's the Barbestown. Let's move on to day 4, which features one much anticipated contest. So day 4 has the Boodles Champion Hurdle, and so much keen anticipation about this race already, Ruby. Let's have a look at the betting. Again, clearly we're dealing with entries, not declarations. I don't know about you, but I cannot see brighter days ahead, given what happened at Cheltenham, turning up in this race. Surely she goes to the Mares. I
think herself and Lossiemouth will both go to the Mares. Personally, I don't know the answer. I haven't asked anybody, but I do think they both will. I think you'll have Constitution Hill, Stateman and Golden Ace here. And to be honest with you, Lydia, I think the three of them will give us a cracking contest.
Well, that is enough. I think it is, particularly if we try and unravel the Champion Hurdle. I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on what happened out there.
Yeah, in March, and it was I don't know, it wasn't a strange race, but it didn't play out the way I thought it would. King of Kingsfield booked out obviously to make the running. Brighter Days Ahead sat in second. Now she clattered the first hurdle, but to me the giveaway was when they went by the winning post in Leopardstown. King of Kingsfield and Brighter Days Ahead were doing 35 miles an hour. They never got up to that speed in the early part of the Champion Hurdle. It was like Jack Kennedy couldn't get Brighter Days Ahead up to that speed, and I was always worried about her, whereas Constitution Hill, Golden Ace and State Man, particularly Paul Townend, as they headed to the second hurdle, looked really, really happy. Now when they ran down to the third hurdle with the aid of a downhill run, which is quite downhill if you do walk Cheltenham, they got up 34 miles an hour. The three behind look really happy, whereas Brighter Days Ahead looks flat to the boards. They dropped the speed going to the fourth hurdle, but again, Nicola Bonva looks happy, so too does Lorcan Williams, and Paul Townend looks particularly happy. Then at the fifth hurdle, Nico squeezes Constitution Hill forward. He steps onto the hurdle and ends up on the floor, and he does hinder Golden Ace, which puts his horse slightly on the back foot. Now when they turn down to the third last end, Jack starts to up the ante. Paul Townend's able to follow him. Lorcan Williams is flat out. He can't quite go the speed they're going as they head down to 3 out, and a jump to that Bachelor Brighter Days Ahead takes over. And then when they're heading to the second last, Paul Townend has a decision. Do I go and take on Jack Kennedy, or do I follow him? And he's looking at Jack Kennedy. I think Lorcan Williams is trying to hang on to the back of him. What's he going to do? And Paul makes his decision. He goes and takes it off Brighter Days Ahead off the bend. They're doing 32 miles an hour, quickens up to get Spire and puts the race to bed going to the last hurdle. And he pulls away from Golden Ace going to the last. Unfortunately for him, he ends up on the floor, and Golden Ace sidesteps to the left and she runs on to win. Now, I have no doubt Stateman was going to win. Was he going to win by as far as you possibly thought when he quickened off the bend? I don't think so. I think he was going to win 4, 5, 6 lengths maybe. I don't think he was going to win 15 or anything, but he was definitely going to win. I think Golden Race has run an absolute cracker. She's a better mare than I thought she was. She's obviously the winner now, but even up to that point, she was a better mare than I thought she was. And I don't think Brighter Days Ahead even showed up.
I think the sectionals bear you out in terms of Golden Ace versus State Man. State Man is quicker from the start to a mile and a half than Golden Ace, quicker at the next furlong and the next furlong and the next furlong. However, he is sort of comparatively slowing, and I think that Golden Ace is maintaining her speed. He was 5.5 lengths up at the point just before where he stepped at the last and left Golden Ace to win the race. And I like you, I can't see any way in which, had State Man stood up, that Golden Ace would have won this race. So to me, and you clearly underestimate her at your peril, I do think she's going to be vulnerable here. The question I suppose about Stateman is, it's how has he come out of that fall?
He seems well. The 3 pieces definitely lit him up. He seems to be in good order at home. David Casey rides him the whole time. He's happy with him. And onwards and upwards to Punchestown for him. Look, it was some going to get him into the form he was in Cheltenham, but they seem pretty happy with him at the moment too.
Okay, that said, I think it was going to be an ordinary Champion Hurdle had State Man even up in terms of, where we classify them. So then you're sort of thinking about Constitution Hill. You are, inevitably. So let's talk about the Aintree Hurdle, in which he also fell, which was won by Lossiemouth, who I think both of us are expecting to go to the Mayor's Hurdle here. It was Woodhoo who ended up pushing Lossiemouth all the way to the line, and Constitution Hill departed. What was your take?
And it was a game of cat and mouse. Nobody wanted to go forward. Nico, Paul Townend, Danny Gilligan, they were all wanting to follow each other below at the start, and eventually when Keelan Woods jumped off, it was Nico riding the shortest one in the betting that had to go and follow him, and then the others slot in to follow Constitution Hill through the race. Now when they got down to the fourth last hurdle then, Harry Skelton switches out and Danny Gilligan spots an opportunity and moves up and pushes Nico to the inside behind the 2 lesser fancied Skelton horses. As they swung across into the straight, then Paul Townend moves on to their tails and Nico's in a right pocket, so he has to wait till Paul goes by as they turn off the bend, and now they're starting to quicken. The Constitution Hill is well covered up at the third last hurdle, but as the others go by, he gets out with loads of room heading to the second last hurdle. Now it was the opposite to Cheltenham, where in Punchestown in Cheltenham, Nico squares Constitution Hill. At Aintree he took him back, and Constitution Hill did the very same thing, stepped into the middle of the hurdle and fell. Now these 2 fillies got up to almost 36 miles an hour going to the last hurdle. It was a real dash, but again they did slow on the way home. Like their third last fraction was 13.34. From the second last to the last they ran 12.6, and the last home it was 13.4. So they had quickened and started to slow on the way home. it's hard to know. To me, as I watched it unraveling in front of your eyes, I'm thinking, guys, I hope you haven't gone too soon. You're now giving Nico a lead. Now he fell, so it doesn't matter. But there was a chance that they had actually put Nico in pole position rather than themselves.
Okay, but of course, what actually happened was that Constitution Hill ended up falling for the second time. So we asked you this, you roadies, what's the biggest barrier to success for Constitution Hill in Friday's Boodles Champion Hurdle? Quite a provocative question. But we wanted to get you talking. Is it A, new jockey James Bowen riding in for the first time? No other person under rules other than Nico de Boinville, who's injured, has ever ridden Constitution Hill. Is it B, his jumping? Is it C, he's just not as good as he was? Or is it D, nothing, no problem, he's still going to win? Before we go into each of those in detail, I'm going to ask Ruby to analyse this in terms of Constitution Hill's jumping.
Right, so I don't think it's fair just to look at Constitution Hill's falls if you're going to try and analyse his jumping. So we're going to look at a couple of his jumps along with that. And we'll start at Kempton in the Christmas hurdle. Hurdle past the stands, fourth hurdle. Nico gives him a squeeze at the wings and he just gets there. But he is capable of doing that and he does listen to Nico when he asks him at times. Then you move it forward to the international hurdle, last hurdle. Now they were going quicker at the last in the international than they were in Kempton, but he doesn't come and Nico asks him, puts down and gets out of it. Champion hurdle, Nico gives him a squeeze and he steps into the middle of the hurdle. No reason. He doesn't even try to jump that. He goes and takes another stride and just stands on the hurdle. Very unlike him, but he didn't get off the ground. And then at Aintree, when Nico took him back and they were doing 35 miles an hour, he does the very same thing as he did in Cheltenham. He just steps onto the middle of the hurdle. Now, I don't know, is it the rubber hurdles? I don't know why he's doing this. I don't even know what the answer is as to how to stop him doing this. But I think the timber hurdles at Punchestown will suit him more so than the rubber hurdles did at Cheltenham or Aintree.
You've dealt with the jumping, Ruby. What do you think about the new rider for James Bowen? It's a big day for him.
Huge day for him. In an ideal world, you would have the same rider. You would still have Nico de Bonville, but unfortunately, the life of a jump jockey dictates that you're not always going to have whoever your chosen rider is, and a speedy recovery to Nico. But that would be an ideal world, but that's not the scenario we're in. And I think it is a big day for James Bowen, but I think it's one he'll be looking forward to.
He has had a big day before. He was given the call upon John Bon in the Clarence House 2 seasons ago. Now, I would argue and have argued consistently that I think there were other factors involved. However, when we analysed the race, we did think that there was a sort of pressured reaction that James made to a mistake that John Bon made on that big day with all eyes on him.
Yeah, but there's only one way you learn anything, Lydia, and that's by experience, by being in those situations. And I think when they don't go right for you, you learn even more, because you then realise actually that what makes you nervous or makes you fearful is always what's going to go wrong. And I think when you experience what goes wrong, you realise that the world isn't over, that things are not as bad as they might seem, and you will get it. And tomorrow or Friday, he's getting another chance. So I think James will have learned a lot from that day in Cheltenham on John Bon, and I think he will be looking forward to Friday.
Clearly, he's a very talented young rider. Now, some people might argue that it's a good thing to have a change of jockey. Sometimes connections will argue when something consistently goes wrong with a horse that actually a new rider might be a positive thing. I must underline, I'm separating this analysis from the absolutely reprehensible abuse that has been wrongly directed towards Nico de Boinville. But how about that angle?
No, I wouldn't agree. I think, like, when you looked at him in the champion hurdle, Nico gave him a squeeze, as he has always done. Then Nico tried something different on him at Aintree, and the horse didn't listen to him. To me, looking at it, and people are always love to blame a human. I think actually here the blame is lying with the horse. And I think the horse has to be responsible for his own actions. I think somehow James Bowen has to try and make Constitution Hill make the decisions for himself. But I do think if Constitution Hill had wrapped the timber hurdle in the international hurdle and stung his shins a little bit, I don't think he'd have done what he did in the champion hurdle or at Aintree.
Interesting. I mean, we've since seen on social media, Seven Barrows, Nicky Henderson's ex account, that the horse has schooled over some baby fences. Will that help?
I'd have jumped them. They were that small. They looked smaller than the jumps that were beside them, whatever they were. But it's not a bad thing, but they did look small, and he did look to jump well. He definitely hasn't lost his confidence, which will be your only worry. But I do think timber hurdles will suit him. And I'd say if he rubs one early, it'll be all the better.
Is he as good as he was? We haven't seen the kind of performance that puts him in the mix to be the best hurdler we've seen since the Champion Hurdle 2023.
That I don't know the answer to. But I do think he was going better in the Champion Hurdle than he was in the International, and I did think he'd come back on the bridle at entry. So I think, I don't know, is he the horse that won the 2023 Champion Hurdle? I don't know. Does he have to be? Maybe not. But I think it's going to be a hell of a horse race.
Here's what the Rogers thinks. Phil Richards says it's the jumping. He's fallen twice in the row. You need to complete the race if you're going to find out if he's as good as he was. Simon Sanders has clearly been at Seven Barrows. He says that Connections have no doubt he retains all of his ability. He thinks the horse was just far too complacent and taking everything for granted. Steve Watts has gone for option E, which wasn't there. Golden Ace is his biggest problem. And John McComb has gone for option F. If I bet him, that's his biggest problem. Overall, overall, the voting there has come down on jumping at 48.2%. Are you with the 17.5%? Nothing he will win, Ruby.
I think he could win, yeah.
That's not the only Grade 1 on the Friday. There's also the Champion Novice Hurdle. It features a rematch between the Yellow Clay, who was second to the New Lion, and Final Demand, who was third. Can Final Demand turn things round?
I think he can. Cat and mouse contest. I think the New Lion got a brilliant ride to win the race, but I think a truer test and with the benefit of a bit more experience, Final Demand could turn it around.
Any other players in that race?
No, I think it's a match. Final Demand, Yellow Clay.
Okay. Let's move on to the Saturday, and necessarily we're talking about these quite briskly. We don't really know which mares are going to turn up in the SBK Irish EBF Mares Champion Hurdle. We're expecting it to be the long-awaited and never before seen Brighter Days Ahead versus Lossiemouth. How do you see that?
There'd be some race, wouldn't it? But it's hard to know. Obviously, Lossiemouth was good at entry, and Cheltenham Brighter Days Ahead didn't turn up. The mare that won at Christmas, if she went there versus the mare that won an entry, it'll be a cracking contest, but who knows what we're going to get on a Saturday in early May.
Is it possible that Brighter Days Ahead left Cheltenham behind over Christmas with that absolutely monster performance?
Absolutely a possibility. And I guess history never seems to teach me any lessons, because with a horse does something as huge as that, they're unlikely to do it again that season.
And would you have any ground concerns for Lossiemouth on the fifth day? No?
No.
Fine. Okay.
I wouldn't have ground concerns full stop at Punchestown. They will heap the water on.
Should move on to the Ballymore Champion 4-year-old hurdle betting, and the Triumph Hurdle will see lots of horses reopposed there. And I suppose the question is, do you go for Poneros, who was able to win the Triumph Hurdle on his debut and factor in improvement, or is there an argument that Lulamba might have done a bit too much in the Triumph?
Big argument that he did. Argument that they all got racing too soon, really. They were doing 36, 37 miles an hour off the bend, and they dropped to 29 miles per hour by the time the guy even got to the last hurdle. So there is an argument that they all went a bit soon or got competitive too early in the Triumph. But it's very easy to argue that Poneros will have improved for his first run of hurdles.
Yeah, very easy. And Messia, the winner at Aintree, is that form good enough?
I don't think it is. She was a bit of a surprise, but I did think there was a couple that ran okay behind Poneros, Plasta La Nation even. Thought that ran a good race and could have improved considerably too.
Okay. Okay, so those are our thoughts on the 5 days at Punchestown. Enjoy the festival, summer well, and we will see you for the restart of the Road to Cheltenham series in November. Bye for now.